I've always been the guy with the soft skills, and I was always jealous of people with the hard skills. And I worked as an evangelist for various tech companies throughout my life, starting in 1994. And I raised several $100 million in Silicon Valley and beyond with my various teams. But I would always go around feeling like I was less valuable than the people with the hard skills, and yet trying to prove that I was valuable, and it was just awkward. And then in 2009, I went to the TED conference for the first time and just saw person after person give the most amazing speeches I had ever heard. And I came back really lit up about that because, number one, I realized that even though I had essentially been a public speaker for my whole life, I had never been giving talks like that. So I was very excited to figure that out. And I volunteered for my friends who were running one of the first ever TEDx events, TEDx Santa Monica. And it was an all volunteer effort. I was volunteering for them at one of the very early TEDx events. And we had this guy who had all the hard skills in the world. And he had the most exciting topic for me. He was the one I was excited to see and waiting for all day. And when he got up on stage and started to speak, everybody in the room checked out because he was so nervous and awkward that we all thought we were going to throw up. And it was just sad. And I remember being really, really sad for a moment because I'd seen that so much in my colleagues, people who had so much to offer and such great education and such deep understanding of such wonderful subjects, but they just couldn't quite communicate them well. And so I was sad for a minute, and then the evil part of me popped out. And I remember sitting there quietly thinking to myself, ha, 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 hard skills guy is blowing it, neener, 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 calls what I do fluffy. And as I was indulging the evil part of myself, my friend Michael Weiss walked over and he leaned down and changed my life forever when he said, dude, we got to do something to help people like this. And I remember it was like I could have had a V8, it was the clouds parted and the angels sang. And I realized that if I just got over myself for 5 minutes, if I stopped carrying this chip around on my shoulder and started honoring the people right there in front of me, I could totally make a difference for that guy. So I went home and started to create what I now deliver all over the world. Trained the US astronauts. I've trained lots and lots of people at NASA, Johnson & Johnson, Boston Scientific, Coca-Cola, Motorola, all because of that moment. And here's what happened in that moment that made that possible for me. I realized that if I wanted to land things with someone like that guy, I would need to base everything I did in human evolutionary biology and human neurophysiology. So I could show people not only what works when it comes to influencing people and leading people and communicating with people and having them take action and remember you, but also why it works based in science. So I created my entire curriculum based in human evolutionary biology and human neurophysiology, so I could show people not just what works, but also why it works based in science. And as someone who communicates data, I've got bad news for you based on all the work that I've done over the last decade plus. Here's the bad news. It's basically that communicating with human beings is not logical. Have you noticed? It's not logical, it's biological. And when you understand the biology, you can make it logical again. But if you go in thinking that people will just immediately understand why this data is important, if you go in thinking that logic by itself should win the day, well, you might be right, maybe it should, but that doesn't affect anything in the real world. You've got to know that there are things going on that are below the consciousness level, impacting how people are relating to your data. And if you take responsibility for understanding that and you present your data in a way that really lands with human beings, you will be vastly more effective in everything that you do. So let me share with you some things that could make a difference. First of all, um, human beings, this is how we count. Okay, this is how human beings count. As somebody who communicates data, this is very important. 1, 2, 3, many. That's how we count. 1, 2, 3, many. Beyond 3, everything is just many. So million, that's big many. Billion, that's really big many. Trillion, that's really, really big many. But we have zero intuition for what that really means. Now, another aspect of human beings and our non-intuitive relationship with data is when you put up that spreadsheet. Have you ever put up a spreadsheet, has all the numbers from the year, and then, boy, this fabulous bottom line? Well, then people started asking you totally irrelevant, silly questions about all the numbers in the middle. Well, you want to know why that happens? It's because in that spreadsheet, all the numbers are the same size and the same color. So they must be the same important. That's going on below our consciousness level. But when you put that up there and they're all the same size and the same number, we relate to them like they're all the same important. So clearly, that makes it difficult when what you're doing all the time is communicating data. So what can you do about it? Let's jump into that. I want to give you a few really great tips and ways to look at this that will make an enormous difference for how your data-filled communications and presentations go. So first of all, I think the biggest thing is to remember that data only matters because it's connected to reality. None of the numbers and data sets that you would be looking at or talking about don't have some connection to reality. Every bit of data that you are going to communicate about ties back to reality in some really important way, or you wouldn't even be talking about it. So tell us the story of how it connects back into reality. Help us understand what it means that the data set is changing like this or changing like that. What are the implications on the business, on the world, on the project, whatever it is we're working on? If you constantly stay in touch with the fact that your data is talking about a reality that matters to people, you will do much better. And be willing to tell us the story of how it is connected to reality. And another way to say that would be, tell us what the experience of this data is for people, right? That's what stories are, is telling us the experiences of people. So that's number one. Remember that your data is always connected back to reality, and just tell us the story of that. And then another really important thing about communicating data is to remember that we don't have an intuition for large numbers. Anything over 3, many, big many. So when you're talking about very big numbers, or when you're talking about any data, to contextualize it through comparing and contrasting and giving us ways to understand that in some way that's more intuitive to us is really key. So the US deficit right now is about $23.3 trillion. And we have about 331 human beings in the United States right now. So what that means is our national debt at 23.3 trillion, that's like everybody would need to pay $70,000. Every single person, man, woman, child, baby, old, young, to pay that deficit down. That begins to get more into the world of intuition. Now, I don't think we have an intuition even for 70,000, but I think we have an intuition for what 70,000's buying power would be in dollars in the United States. So that starts to bring it close to home. Now, another great company to look at for examples of this is Apple. They're really good at this. I don't know if you're old enough to remember when Steve Jobs pulled the MacBook Air out of the manila envelope. That was a much better way to say, hey, this thing is incredibly light and small and got a great form. That's much better than telling us the dimensions, how many inches and how many millimeters and things like that, to just pull it out of a manila envelope. What are some things that you could do like that with your data? Apple also came out with a very thin version of the iPod and said it's as thin as a pencil, right? So what are some ways that you can contextualize and compare and contrast the data so that your audience will get an intuitive understanding of it versus just a purely conceptual understanding of it? A conceptual understanding is great, but it doesn't drive behavior. It doesn't have people remember it and feel it and take it on. It doesn't matter as much if it's just conceptual. Now, here's a great quote from a woman named Brene Brown. What if stories are just data with a soul? That's brilliant. I love it. Let's play it backwards and say, when you tell the story of your data, that is an excellent way to give your data soul. So use comparing, use contrasting, use contextualizing. Tell us the story of how this data relates back to reality, and you will be giving your data soul. Now, here's the final request I have for you. Be willing to take a little bit of a risk here and there to engage your audience and land your message. If you want to see a fabulous talk by somebody who's communicating what could be deadly boring data that turns out to be incredibly exciting and fun, go to TED.com, look up Hans Rosling, and watch his talk, The Best Data You've Ever Seen. He tells us the story of the transformation that has been happening on planet Earth and brings those statistics to life. It could have been deadly boring. It's actually one of the most watched talks on TED, and it's purely stats. So I know you can do it. Be willing to take that risk. Be willing to think for 5 minutes longer than you might otherwise about how you can really have people get this on an intuitive level. And if you do these things, I guarantee you that you will be 1 trillion times better as a presenter of data. Thank you.